Hi folks, welcome to our Chapter 5 video on performance pay choices. So we did discuss when we were looking at formulating a compensation strategy or the elements of the compensation mix in the previous video series, we talked about performance pay as being one way that employees can be compensated. So we're going to look at a little more detail on that right now. So some of our learning objectives in this chapter would be to discuss the applicability as well as the advantages and disadvantages of individual performance pay systems, of which there are 4 main types, group performance pay systems, of which there are 3 main types, and organization performance pay, of which there are 3 main types. And all of those types can be seen here in this diagram, and they may look familiar to you because we did discuss them in the previous chapter. We looked first of all at individual performance types as being things like piece rates, commissions, merit pay, and some special purpose incentives. Group performance, we said, could be rewarded using gain sharing and goal sharing plans and other bonus plans, which we'll talk a little bit about, as well as rewarding people for good organizational performance. We can share profits, we can have stock plans, and there might be other performance plans that organizations use. So let's begin our discussion with individual performance and look specifically at piece rate. Now, a piece rate system is one under which individuals will receive a particular sum of money each time they produce a unit of output. Now, let's make sure we understand it has to be a quality unit of output. It just can't be anything that's slapped together, right? It has to be good quality. Now, sometimes we see these in organizations like, say, textile industry, where, say for example, there's a company and they make uniforms for the RCMP, the police, whatever. They might have people they compensate to make how many pockets did you make, how many zippers did you put in, how many buttonholes did you make. So every time you make one of these things or insert zippers, that kind of thing, maybe you're getting paid for how many of those you do. So that's just the scenario where it might apply. And there's different types of piece rate incentives. It could be a straight piece rate where, say, you're paid 20 cents for every pocket you make. Well, if you make 1 million pockets, within a period of time, you're going to get 20 cents a pocket, right? So it's just based on production, straight production. Sometimes there's some companies have differential piece rates. They want to make it more motivating. So say, for example, they might say, okay, we're going to pay you 20 cents a pocket for the first 1,000 pockets you do. Any pocket over 1,000 but under 2,000, so from 1,001 to 1,999, that grouping, I'm going to pay you 25 cents a pocket. Right? And then if you go over 2,000 to up to 3,000, I might pay you, maybe 28.5 cents a pocket, whatever I want, right? But it's differential. Anyway, if we look at some of the advantages and disadvantages, certainly the advantages is that it's very good at producing task behavior, doing your job and doing it well, right? Because you're going to get paid every time you do it and do it well. You certainly don't need as much external control over the employees unless the job isn't being done right. But usually we have workers who are highly skilled and highly trained at doing it, at least over time, because they're doing the same kind of job and it's very repetitive, right? So they get good at it. It certainly links compensation to output, and it reduces employer risk because the more the employee does the job, it's a more routinized job. They become better at it. So obviously less employer risk because the product is probably going to be better. And one of the other advantages is it provides specific information about the standard level of expected output. So if you don't get paid for certain pockets that you make, you certainly know why, because you know what a bad job looks like as opposed to a good one. So it's a good way to train people. Some of the disadvantages is that, how many jobs are piece rate jobs out there? Not that many, so it might not apply to a lot of jobs. It may need to be recalculated each time a major change occurs. So say, for example, companies are paying out a lot in terms of piece rate, or maybe not enough. They may need to recalculate to see maybe we need to rethink our system. Maybe we're not paying enough. Maybe it's difficult for employees to make the product that they're responsible for. Maybe it takes longer, and maybe what we're paying them isn't as motivating. We might need to may need to relook at that. Setting how much you're going to pay isn't really a scientific process. So you really have to look at how much do I really want to spend. on having a piece rate system. So it should all start with the company's budget, and frequently it doesn't motivate a maximum effort. And I'm not exactly sure why this is here. The only thing I can think of and why it might not always motivate a maximum effort is, say for example, people start to feel like they're just the horsepower behind the organization, and they're not really feeling necessarily intrinsically rewarded. It's more external. And I think people, as they reach a higher level of need, they might want more intrinsic reward. And it can create conflict among workers. I've seen this happen many times in organizations whereby they might say, hey, you're working too fast, you're doing too well. A lot of us aren't quite at that level yet. Can you lower the pace, change the standard a bit? We don't want to all have to follow in your shoes, because if they see one or two workers who can supersede the standard, guess what? That becomes the new standard, the one they're working to, and everybody else has to follow suit. So it can cause some conflict among some workers. Now, if we want to determine or think a little bit more about when could we use piece rate systems in organizations, when would they be most applicable? Well, the most suitable jobs are those where individual workers can control their own production. There may be interdependence between workers is low, so there isn't much interdependence, so you work quite independently. Each unit of production can be fairly easily measured and priced, so we can certainly see if the job is good or if it's bad, and we can certainly price or know how much we're going to pay. So it allows us to control compensation to an extent. And individuals perform a limited number of tasks. So again, you're a specialist in a particular job. So if you're motivated by task behavior, then certainly it might be an appropriate environment within which to try a piece rate system if it works. But again, it doesn't really apply to a lot of jobs out there. Now, let's look at a second type of individual performance pay plan in terms of sales commissions. Now, sales commissions, most of us know, real estate agents work under this. Any kind of salesperson can be working on a commission. And the advantage is, of course, it's relatively easy to set and to measure. So you know when people are hitting their targets because you know how much they're paying them, right? It reduces the need for other types of control mechanisms by the employer. So the employer doesn't really have to follow you up a lot, because they can go back and see how much you're selling based on the parameters under which the bonus is calculated, so they can see how well or how not so well you're doing and decide when they want to intervene. So they might not have to have a lot of different control systems or control your behavior as much. It's certainly a source of feedback, because you can say, hey, you've only sold X amount to existing customer this month. You know, we wanted you only sold $60,000 worth. Their target was $80,000. How come you didn't make it? What's going on, right? So it gives us a basis for management to go back and open up a discussion with employees. It certainly can reduce employer risk, because as long as the employer can set the commission structure such that it's motivating and they've got the right people in there, those targets should be hit, and obviously you can increase sales. Some of the disadvantages is that for the employee, if the income is too variable, right, especially if economic times are tough, you may lose major clients, right? It might become tough for some employees to maintain their standard of living. Sometimes the employer will pay a higher total pay. So if the employer has underestimated the abilities of their employees and they've budgeted a certain level for sales commission payout, and the employees were actually exceeding the targets, then sometimes employers might say, whoa, we didn't expect that. Commissions can drop if the economic conditions are poor. We just talked about that a few minutes ago. But what would that mean to the worker? They may be less motivated, right? So you have to make sure that maybe there might be times when you want to, even for a short period of time, augment it with some kind of small base pay. New salespeople receive a little income as they develop contacts, so they're just learning, right? So that's why a lot of times in sales-driven organizations, if we're going to hire sales reps, we want them to come with what we call their book of business, or bring something to us, so they're not starting from scratch all the time. But sometimes, say you hire new grads to do sales jobs, a lot of companies might offer them a small base to start, maybe for a year and a half, until they get their feet wet, they understand the market a little bit better and what the customer is looking for, and maybe after that They might wean off the base a bit and then get into a stronger commission structure. And another disadvantage is resist doing work that doesn't directly contribute to new sales. Well, that depends too on how you're bonusing your sales staff or how you're calculating your commission. If you're going to say, we're only going to give you stronger commissions on if we're going to give you stronger commissions based on what you sell, then there might be some other work that doesn't get done, right? Because you're focused on reaching the goal, lining your pockets, right, with this commission, right? So you might not look at other duties and your job as having as great importance if you're focused on duties that are going to increase your commission. So one of the advantages is it creates focus, but you certainly want to make sure when you're crafting commission jobs that you don't put too much admin in there or administrative bureaucracy in there, because they're not going to, your salespeople are not really going to focus there. They're going to focus more on what's going to put money in their pocket, and the company wants that too, because again, it's going to also impact their organizational performance. So if we want to look at the different types of sales commissions, we have straight commission, where you get paid based on what you sell. Maintenance selling, we might have a certain percentage of your commission, which is based on you selling products that we currently have to existing customers, so you have to maintain your existing base with your existing products. You might have conversion selling commissions, so maybe not just maintenance selling, so you might say, well, we want you to make sure that you keep our existing customers happy with the products they're buying or that we already have, but we also are going to calculate your commission based on you selling to new customers, so finding new customers for our established products. But what about new products selling? We want you to be able to sell some of our new products to our existing and our new customers. So leverage the existing customer to sell new products to, and new market selling, new products, new customers. So companies can craft, depending on where they want you to sell and what they want you to sell, they can determine a commission structure based on that too. So it doesn't only have to be straight commission, it can be a composite of any one of these four as well. So when is it most appropriate to use sales commissions to motivate behavior? Well, it depends on the degree of independence the worker's going to have, the degree to which persuasive skills are required, and the length of the selling cycle. So if your workers are going to have a high degree of independence and autonomy, if they have the required degree of persuasive selling skills, and also if the length of the sales cycle is short, meaning that from the time they meet the customer to the time they close the sale is short, that might be a good opportunity to implement some kind of a commission program for people. But again, it depends on the job and if the job is appropriate for it. Now, let's move on to the next piece, which is merit pay. So again, we're still in individual performance pay, but we're going to look at a third component, third of the fourth types, which is merit pay. Now, we have two different types here. We have a merit raise and a merit bonus. A merit raise is different than a merit bonus because, say an employee is making $50,000 a year and you give them a 5% increase. Now their base pay has changed. It's gone from $50,000 to $52,500, right? With a merit bonus, it's a one-time add to pay. So what's going to happen is that your base pay is $50,000. If you get a merit bonus of 5%, your pay now that you're going to take home is $52,500, but you're going to have to earn that 5% or whatever the merit piece is going to be every year, so your base pay doesn't change. And that's significant because a lot of benefits in organizations, say your healthcare benefits, your life insurance, things like even your pension contributions, a lot of those to your own company sponsored pension plan, sometimes they're based on base pay. So if here your base pay is changing, that means contributions are going to be bigger. Here your base pay isn't changing. So it's a little bit different, okay? So employees have to earn that merit bonus every year, but it's calculated as a percentage of your base. So it is a type of merit. So now, what are some of the advantages of the merit raise? We'll focus here first. First of all, it does focus attention on overall behavior. It does provide feedback to employees. And it is a means for advancement through the pay range. So in other words, you can move beyond that $50,000 a year, right? Because you're earning a bigger base. It helps to retain outstanding employees if, now the only way that works is if the amount of the raise in the employee's mind is commensurate with the level of effort they had to put forward in order to earn that raise, right? So if the employee is getting what they expected, remember we talked about expectancy theory in several chapters ago, right? So it all gets back to that. If the employee feels that there's a match between the amount of the merit raise and the effort and what they produced, then again you will retain good employees. But if not, they may leave. And it can foster perceptions of equity if you have, remember the organizational and procedural justice we talked about? You have to make sure it's fairly and consistently applied. Some of the disadvantages of merit raises is they can be very expensive, as I said before, because they're permanent. They're permanent add to pays, right? It does require an effective employee appraisal system, so one where there's procedural and distributive justice. We need to ensure a noticeable difference in pay. So if you're going to give out like 1% pay increases, somebody's going to say, hey, give me $500 increase when I earn $50,000. What's that going to translate to? A penny a pay? I don't know. By the time the tax department takes their cut, what does it mean? Is it really motivating? So you want it to make sure that it's recognized. Sometimes we find people top out. Now we talk about this a little bit more in terms of formulating compensation strategies later on in the course. But what happens if a person is at the top of their pay range? So say for example you're earning $50,000 and the top of the pay range is $55,000. You just got a 5% increase, right? So now you're earning $52,500. If that pay range doesn't move sufficiently in the next year, you're almost at the top of your range. Most times what companies do when you reach the top of your pay range, if there's no promotion in the offing for you, then what's going to happen? They're going to red circle you because they won't pay you more than the range, the top of the range, which in my example here is $55,000. So there is a topping out problem that is associated with giving merit raises. And what happens is that the employee says, well, I'm not going to get any more pay increases once I reach the top of my range. So either I'm going to put forth less effort because there's no advantage to me financially to do it, or company's going to have to think of another way to motivate me, right? Incentivate me. Provide more intrinsic rewards, maybe not just extrinsic, and then you got to know what the company or the individual values, right? So it can be a little challenging for compensation professionals. It does inhibit to an extent some collaborative behavior unless your merit raise or part of the way you're going to evaluate whether or not a person is going to get their raise in part is due to collaborative behaviors. But if people work, somewhat in isolation or alone, it could be a disadvantage. It's not suitable where work is highly interdependent. I wouldn't say it's not suitable. It really depends on the work environment. But we usually tend to find that where the work is highly interdependent with somebody else, we're just tending to use more group incentives or team incentives. So that's why we're talking in these last two bullets that it's kind of a disadvantage, because you wouldn't want to give out increases then necessarily on an individual basis. Sometimes, if you're looking at people working in teams, that kind of thing, then you might want to look more at group or team incentives as opposed to just an individual merit raise. So it depends. Now, let's look at merit bonuses. We've already described them as one-time add to pay. Some of the advantages is that they're not permanent, so the employee has to earn them all the time. So the employee also has to be at the top of their game all the time. It can be related to financial conditions of the firm. So sometimes the firm might take the viewpoint that, hey, we don't want to, blow our compensation budget every year by having merit raises. Let's make them work for it. So sometimes companies say we want to be able to control our operating budgets a little better, so we're going to use merit bonuses. And it actually can serve as a solution to a topping out problem, because now you would stay at $50,000. You're not getting closer to that $55,000 mark, but you could earn a 5% bonus. But it's only a one-time add to pay, so you kind of avoid that topping out problem that you have with the merit raises over here, right? Some of the disadvantages is you do need to have a valid performance measurement system to know how much that bonus is going to be. And again, it may not be suitable where the work is highly interdependent, okay, because it's on individual contributions that the bonus is being given. And again, if you're trying to promote high involvement, in fact, I should have probably mentioned that here in the merit raise. It's probably not good here, because if you're trying to promote high involvement, then merit raises or even merit bonuses might not be the route you want to go. And the bonus amount might need to be higher in order to motivate behavior, but that can happen with anything, right? Any kind of a bonus system. So you have to determine, for how much I'm paying as a bonus, am I getting that value back from the employee? What's happening? There may be a reason you are not. So you really need to look at that. All right. Now, what some organizations have found, by the way, when we look at merit bonuses and merit raises, they're predicated on, are calculated based on a base pay. So they all start with a base pay from which you calculate a new base if it's a merit raise, or a bonus if it's a merit bonus. And many organizations have found that using a higher proportion of base pay has lower employee turnover than those organizations that rely more heavily on commissions. So sometimes if you're looking to decrease your employee turnover, if you're having that problem, you might find that you need to really focus on offering solid base pay and maybe merit bonuses and merit raises, okay, if you're having turnover issues, okay? And I mean, this is just part of the research. They're finding if you rely too heavily on commissions, you may stand to lose some people. That's just part of the research that we have found, but it certainly doesn't mean that that it has to be that way. Sometimes companies will decide what positions do merit bonuses and merit raises apply to. Some positions, commissions are better, and some positions within the same organization, piecework might be appropriate. So you can have all these different individual performance pay systems being used in specific jobs. They're not necessarily organization or job organization specific. Doesn't mean everybody has to have a bonus. It doesn't mean everybody has to have a merit raise. It doesn't mean that, right? So you have to look at where these different methods would be best applied. All right. So now, if we're going to look at the applicability of merit pay, what conditions need to exist that make it most suitable? Well, first of all, if you're going to use any kind of merit pay system, whether it's a merit raise or a merit bonus, is individual performance variable? So in other words, will performance, say I have different people who hold the position administrative assistant in an organization, or an accountant in an organization, or a human resources generalist in an organization. If I have 2 or 3 generalists, 2 or 3 accountants, 2 or 3 admin assistants, is their performance variable? Like, will it vary, and will I be able to differentiate it so that I could give out a merit bonus or merit pay of any kind, right? It might be suitable. If you can differentiate, it might be suitable. Does the individual have the ability, based on the amount of control that the organization passes to the employee, is their performance controllable? Can they improve? Can they implement systems that will make things more efficient, more effective? Can they change up the job? Can they improve things on the job? Because if they can, then merit pay might be appropriate. Can individual performance be separated out? So again, can we differentiate it, and is it variable? So these 1 and 3 are kind of related. Can an accurate performance appraisal system be developed? That's a good question, right? If we can actually develop a performance appraisal system that's going to monitor and track what people are doing, right? Then we need to be able to use that to appraise the performance. So if jobs change so quickly that it's impossible to come up with a valid, up-to-date performance measure and standards, okay, then it might not be appropriate, okay, if the job is changing too much, to use merit pay. Does the organization have the resources to develop a reliable and valid system, and to train managers and supervisors who will rate the performance of the individuals, right? So again, that's all part of developing an accurate appraisal system. You have to be able to track the performance, and your managers need to be trained in delivering sometimes some not so good news on performance to some very nice folks, and maybe develop, giving great news to great employees, right? So again, you need to make sure that you train your management. Can you actually link pay to performance? So will the employee perceive that their pay increase that they got matched the effort and the achievement of the goals? So in other words, are the employees getting a sense of that organizational and distributive and procedural justice, right? So will pay actually be linked to performance appraisals, and is it going to be a good measure? So I got a 5% pay increase. That's $2,500 on $50,000. Yeah, I would say my effort's worth that. Some people might say, huh? I worked my butt off. I think I'm worth way more. So again, is the actual amount of the pay going to link to what they achieved, right, in the appraisal? If they walked on water and they're only getting $2,500, some people might take exception to that. Will the merit system serve a purpose that can't be served in some other way? So again, sometimes we may find, and we said this before, is some of the disadvantages of merit systems. Sometimes if you're expecting people in high involvement organizations to work as a team, it may not be appropriate to have merit pay. It might be appropriate to have team incentives. So is a merit system going to serve the purpose of what you're trying to measure? Maybe you might find a team incentive might be best. Are there any undesirable side effects that are readily manageable? So in other words, one possible undesirable side effect might be when employees concentrate only on an aspect of the job that's most visible in the performance appraisal process. So say, for example, you set 5 goals for your employee to meet. That might mean that the focus of their next 6 months, because if they're getting their appraisal in 6 months, they're only going to focus on those 5 goals and nothing else is going to be important. So, but there are some other things they need to do, right? So you got to make sure that they're staying focused on the entire job and not just those things they're going to get bonused on. And is the merit system going to fit with the company's culture and strategy? So again, we have to look at, in classical organizations, say for example, merit pay for rank and file employees might be prohibited by union contracts. Maybe you can't give merit pay, right? So if you're unionized, you might find merit systems don't work, right? And that's sometimes unionized environments are associated more with classical and human relations managerial strategies. If you're high involvement, you might say, well, merit system might not fit here. I want to use a team incentive, not an individual merit system. So again, you have to look at what's best for your organization and whether or not it fits. Now, I'm going to cut the video off here and start my second video for this chapter with special purpose incentives, which is the last of the type of individual performance pay systems. So we'll be back in a moment.